You're listening to WeDeepen Media.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder of WeDeepen, Feminine Weapon, and also a certified professional love coach for anybody who wants to deepen in the relational journey, whether it is that you're currently single or that you are in relationship with a significant other, or that you're just aiming to find your tribe and be in community. Go check out that calendar at WeDeepen.com. See all the up and coming experiences. Tantra Speed Date has been booming. We have so many locations that are now hosting Tantra Speed Dates. I'm also looking forward to taking the Dating Dojo into some new markets as well. You'll see some festivals, and we are going to keep populating that calendar with social and transformational experiences that are intended to help you have more meaningful, loving relationships. Also, when you get to WeDeepen.com, you can now see in the navigation bar, there is a matchmaking and coaching section. Head over there if you're interested in joining the matchmaking database. There is a link for that, and you'll complete a brief questionnaire to get into that database. It's free for now, so definitely take advantage of that. And also, you can schedule a discovery call with us. It's a complimentary 30-minute discovery call. I don't know for how long they're going to be complimentary, so definitely take advantage of that in this moment. And if you like this podcast, please do like, subscribe, follow, leave a rating. It helps more people to discover the podcast and also helps me continue to host it. Today, I am in Austin, Texas. I'm sitting on my couch in a new subleased apartment, and I have a new, just dear friend that feels like an innate soul sister. We met initially at Relate Fest for people who are endlessly curious about relationships. We met there in March of 2022, and then directly the week after that Relate Fest was Unleash, a transformational festival that, as you know of, I've been talking about that on this podcast. If you listen, I've been talking about that since its inception, actually, but throughout this whole podcast episode, WeDeepen, who created Unleash, has been on about 4 episodes. And Meleza and I have just come out of another Unleash. 2 weeks ago here in Austin, Texas, there was about 250 people that gathered. And it was interesting for me, of like these events happened back to back. I came straight out of the biohacking conference and into Unleash and got to do the Dating Dojo there. And Meleza was one of the, what do we call that? Angels, the healing,
lead angel.
A lead angel.
So emotional support. Hi. So I created the emotional support sanctuary for Unleash Austin, and I was the lead angel, which was WeDeepen's choice, which was a great choice, and hired a team of 4 other people. And we supported the field in any kind of needs that they might have had around emotional, mental, psychological support.
And what is so necessary when you have people going through transformation, that they have these spaces and people that help to hold them, that are essentially there to be dedicated to the well-being of the people. Because at Unleash, it's definitely a fully immersive experience. And when I say immersive, there was a de-armoring exercise or activity where people really opened up and expressed themselves. And not only from like, yes, there are people out there who are walking around naked, but people are also pulling back layers of conditioning and the idea of who they thought they should be, and also healing through trauma. I mean, it does bring up trauma in these types of spaces. So Meleza is an intimacy coordinator. She is well known in many communities for the work that she does in the world of helping, I would say underneath of all of that, it's connection, it's relational work. And we're having this conversation today around the topic of restorative justice, because at the end of Unleash, there's a closing ceremony. And Meleza was one of the people who stood up in a line to share reflections of what that experience was to them. And there was something that she had an experience with somebody within the community who was there present that was that she was sitting on by herself and holding it alone. And as quote unquote conscious communities continue to come together, it's how do we hold people accountable within a community environment for actions that directly impact the well-being of another human being. And I was so, first off, grateful to hear the vulnerability and the boldness. I mean, it was really bold to get up there and to speak that way, and courageous to do that. And it reminded me of the times when I didn't. And there's still instances in my life where why I find the Me Too movement and Time's Up movement was instrumental for the progress, and it's messy and chaotic, and sure, everyone can look at it and be like, it could have been done a better way. Everybody likes to look at feminism and be like, yes, that was great that they did that, but they did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. And so as we're going through transformational processes, it can be messy, and to have these continuous conversations around how can this be done a different way, and specifically in community, and specifically around when groups are so intimately aligned where, you call the police and they don't really know this from that. They're stuck in their own world with their own neighborhoods and their own chaos, their own shit. And then we're going to bring them into our shit. And when we also have people around us who are highly intelligent and thoughtful. And so what does this idea of restorative justice look like? And that's today's conversation that we are going to have. And I'm excited for you to get to know Meleza. I'm excited for myself to have the opportunity to get to know her even better. So thank you for being here and for being so open to sharing your story. Now, I know before we turn this record button on, you did give me background of information that I wasn't aware of. To frame the conversation as we go into restorative justice, what do you think it's important for listeners to hear?
Such a great question. I think what's come up recently is the nuance of rupture, repair, and reconnection. So the broader question is, when do we seek legal help, and when do we rely on the justice system as it is? When do we seek community help and rely on restorative justice processes that can happen within community braces? When do we seek psychiatric and psychological help, where then we have the other option of outpatient houses, retreat centers, and then also psychological wards? So there's all of these nuances in these conversations about what do we do when there has been a rupture, and how do we ensure that in the process of taking self-accountability, we're also holding a collective accountability, and we're not shying away from it. We're not constantly saying, I don't have time, I'm too busy, actually this other thing has come up. It becomes a priority, and it becomes something that we all see as a priority, not so that we can then further indemnify somebody, but so that we can clear the space for more growth to happen, which is ideally what I would love to see more of, and I would love to be more a part of.
When you were speaking, I started to think of or see, almost Judge Judy for communities. And I imagine that there are people who are listening that are, even to some extent, we're so blessed that we get to be in these conversations around community, because many people coming out of COVID and prior to COVID don't even know what that looks like. I mean, you lived in New York City, I believe, for a period of time. I lived in New York City for a period of time. And there is so often that I don't even know who my next door neighbors are. So, what is even, let's even start with that question. I would love to hear you answer, like, what is community to you, and how has that been created in your ecosystem?
Great. So I've been living in communities, conscious, intentional, quote unquote, communities, since 2015. I started in New York City. I lived in a community called Utopia, Utopia. And it was folks that are sex positive, that are poly, that are kinksters, that also are ecosexuals, or people who care about the environment and they really want to see, change in the environment. That was kind of the theme that we had at that time when I joined. So it felt like a safer space to freely express myself, which is a big part of my own personal brand that I'm building called Eat My Cake. It's helping build a world where people feel safer to freely express themselves and have freedom of choice. And so I was drawn to it. And there was one person who owned the row house, and, things were okay. There was a lot of things about the space that I came up against, but I ended up living there for almost 2.5 years. And then I actually moved 5 houses down into a brand new apartment with 2 other community members, one person that I had been living with and one of their friends. And the idea was that we were going to have a sister community. So like a place that whenever someone got overwhelmed at Utopia, they could just pop over and come do events, or we could also co-host events between the 2 spaces. That idea didn't come into fruition for a few different reasons, but the concept of community stayed in my mind from that moment on, of like, wow, what is it like to live in a space where it's not each individual house has a spatula in an apartment building. There's so many spatulas in an apartment building. It's like each floor has a communal kitchen and there's 1 or 2 spatulas. It's like, what are we doing to reduce waste? What are we doing to provide support for each other? What are we doing to address the fact that we are communal creatures, but we're living in a modern day society where putting each other and putting ourselves in little boxes, it is what is creating the most amount of safety, quote unquote. So it's kind of going against this whole model of separating humans, and bringing us together. But then that next piece of like, okay, we're together now, but we live in a world where that's not necessarily the case. I mean, the amount of times I told people that I lived in a community space like that, people are like, oh, so you live in a hippie commune where everybody just has sex with each other and they're naked all the time. And I'm like, kind of. I mean, sometimes it happens. I certainly haven't had sex with everybody I live with, but like there's a couple people I have my eyes on, and so like there's this stigma around communes as well. So anyway, I then moved to Austin during the pandemic, actually, and I lived in a community in 2020 that was more from a one taste background or oming community background, which I didn't know much about. And then slowly but surely, I started learning that one taste and oming has a history of cult-like behavior. And I was like, whoa. And I was in the middle of doing my intimacy coordination training at that time. So I'm learning about these power dynamics. I'm learning about all of these structures that are coming into place. I'm learning about like trauma-informed facilitation. And I'm stepping into another community space where, again, it's one person who's paying the rent or who's quote unquote in charge, even though they're trying to not have that title. They're trying to dissipate the power structure. There's still this clear understanding that when I lived at Utopia, there's one person who owns that building. And when I lived at this Ohm house, there's one person who's bringing everyone together for the most part and who's directly speaking to the landlords. So the third community I lived at is also in Austin, and I moved there in 2021. And that community is called Heart Yard, and that's a matriarchal community. So it was the first time that I lived in a matriarchal community. And again, this is like part of the heat of everything. Like, there's this whole, hashtag fuck the patriarchy movement. There's this whole Me Too movement. There's all of these movements that are about women empowering women. And I'm like, great, this could maybe help me actually feel held by a space of more women, but also heal a lot of the trauma that I've experienced from growing up in a household where I actually have a ton of matriarchal wounding. And it comes from ancestry and lineage of my Hispanic family members telling me that, if someone abuses you, like that's your husband or that's your father or that's your mother and you still love them. And, like that's what you do. And you forgive and forget. And I have a lot of wounding from that time in my life. So this next community space, I was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. They're artists, there's theater backgrounds, they're clowns, there's like quote unquote sex positive, probably more sex positive these days now, to be honest, upon, some reflection that I've seen. But it's essentially building a space where people commune together and share resources and have an opportunity to show their individuality, but within a collective space. So it's more of a working organism. It's more molecules put together than it is a single atom.
Yeah. And when it comes to community, there's this idea of living in community, living with each other. And you don't necessarily need to live with the people to feel an essence of community. When we were having this conversation, it was, this incident that happened in one of the community spaces that you were living at, but it's how can it's not just the people there, there's a broader range of community. And I grasp that as like people who are traveling through similar experiences, whether that's festivals, retreats, in a similar line of work, and they're using each other as support system. You had mentioned about growing up and that, in your family, there was like, yeah, you can be abused, but you love these people. This is love. So forgive and forget. And I do believe in the idea of loving them. But loving doesn't necessarily mean that you sit beside somebody as they're giving you shit, or that you even live in the same house with them. Love also comes with boundaries and with saying no. And oftentimes, we see in those types of environments a lot of like sweeping things under the rug, like avoid conflict at all cost. And there's a thing, Derek Hart, who was also at Relate Fest with us, he was one of the keynotes. And I even saw on his, he posted on Facebook recently saying that, that the majority of like the depth that is created in intimate relationships comes from conflict repair. And how we overcome that. Sure, and he did start to get backlash of being like, well, I also deepen with my significant other having playful and fun adventures. Sure, of course you do. But the depth of the work, when you really feel so close to somebody, is when you've overcome something that was challenging and you got to know them more deeply, and some healing has happened in its process. And only in saying that now, in this moment of you calling forth this idea of restorative justice within our communities, actually, I hear it as a cry for we can be more connected. We can go deeper. And we can be here at this festival and dancing and having fucking fun. And it's amazing. And let's call forth in a communal way of supporting each other through the challenges. So If you could take me back to that moment at Unleash and what it was that was moving through you when you got up on stage in front of 150 people and shared the way that you shared, why then, why that moment?
Yeah, I don't know if the person who assaulted me hadn't been there, if I would have said anything. And it's complex because in some ways I really do wish that that person would not have been there. And in some ways that person being there is what's actually allowing for this forward motion to happen, where I'm actually feeling like little pieces of weight chipping off of me. And it is an incredibly vulnerable feeling to have that, because the armor, right, of keeping myself safe is to say, I don't want my reputation to be tarnished by this. I don't want people to think, oh, Meleza gets into fights with people and now there's a restorative justice process. And I don't know if we can really hire her or bring her on board or bring them on board. Because, you know, it's a little too risky. And I think I just kind of reached a threshold where I felt empowered enough to make a statement about the complexities by which I had a hard time at Unleash, which was to hold this activation point as an emotional support lead while witnessing the person who has assaulted me's personal transformation. And that was an unleashing for me. And it was an unleashing of my silence. It was an unleashing of me feeling like I couldn't be seen. And also of this concept of, what does it mean? What does social justice mean in community? What am I reinventing in community? And that's actually what I'm reinventing. I am reinventing my relationship to community. Number one, understanding that I don't necessarily need to live in a community to be a part of a community, which is like, duh, but I wanted to try that out. And I'm realizing like my role might actually be more of the bridge builder and more of the weaver, as opposed to necessarily being a part of someone else's dream structure, you know. And that's another piece that we can potentially dive into if there's time. But yeah, I totally had written out this like very well written, like multiple paragraph statement. And then, you know, all of a sudden we're like, okay, give your testimonial. And it's like, you have a minute and a half. And I was like, oh my God, like, I won't be able to read this thing. So fuck it. I'm just going to go for it. And it was very raw and it was very vulnerable. And I've kind of like thought about that moment many times as to like, oh, like, did I not do it right, quote unquote, you know, and just allowing the expression to happen. And so I would say like, there's a few factors at play that I felt safe enough. There are two people present at Unleash who are people that care about me very much. And they held me very well in their own space without biasing me, but checking in on me. And then my angel team, I did have to tell them what the deal was. And they actually, you know, were supporting me in that process, even though I had clearly stated to them, this is not an invitation for you to take sides if you do support me in this way. And inclusively, like I didn't ask them for support per se. It just kind of happened. And that was very helpful. And then, you know, the person who assaulted me, they actually respected the activation space that I set up. So they didn't enter it and they didn't come near it and they didn't really come near me. And they kept as far away as possible until the last day. And on the last day, there was a moment where I did feel like my personal space was invaded by them, but there was a lot happening that day. So yeah, that's what allowed for me to feel safer to express myself and just to say, you know what, I'm breaking up from this Austin community in this way. I'm actually done. Like, this is a breakup. And I'm okay with that. And I don't need to continue being friends with any of you. And I love you, and that's okay. But I want this process, and I want people to witness this process, because the witnessing is so important. And that's just what I've learned in all of my personal development work, is the witnessing piece. And that's why even like all of these retreats happen. And that's how like these festivals happen. It's because we're witnessing each other's experiences. And at the end of the day, as I was speaking to a mediator about this a couple days ago, I said, yeah, it's not about me being right or wrong. I want to be right. My ego wants to be right. My ego wants to feel vindicated and wants to say, see, I told all of you, but I don't really know how far that's going to get any of us. Like, it's just going to show that, yes, I've been hurt, but is it actually going to create a process by which everyone can learn to speak from themselves from a place of integrity and kindness and compassion, but also honoring some very strong boundaries around what's being said or done?
That witnessing piece is so instrumental, I believe, for the healing process. And I mean, that is even the catalyst, I imagine, for AAA and, domestic violence circles and people getting together to heal. And what I really appreciate, though, is because I oftentimes look at, Al-Anon or Alcohol Anonymous, and seeing these people, and they're all been hurt in a similar way, and going and healing together, which is beautiful. And also the external world doesn't get to be a witness to that. And so there's a lack of understanding of what's happening or what's going on. Episode 39 of this podcast is actually, we just re-released it. It's with Jack Hunter Cohen, and he is the creator of the Witness Circle. And it's a weekly experience that a group of people will come together for 6 weeks, and they get to share their stories. And in sharing your story is where, first off, number one is where, kind of as you said, it's like, of course your ego wants to be right. You want to re-encount your story, and you're probably, I imagine, in some ways you're like, somebody tell me how I could have done better. Like, there is a why I think that we are sharing our story. For sure, we want the validation that what we did was correct, but we also are doing it because we want to grow and heal and learn in each and every step of the journey. So then the witnessing of it in the restorative justice process seems super important, because otherwise, people just go in and they withdraw. And then they feel isolated and separated. And I believe that's probably where a lot of the mental health issues happen within that withdrawal, within that loneliness. That's what creates loneliness, is when we feel as though we're holding on to these bits and pieces and these vulnerable aspects to us that we're scared to share. And for me, as there's these 2 instances in my life, and they were around sexual assault. And when you did share your story, my brain automatically went like, who is this man in this space who sexually assaulted Meleza? And that's where I'm like looking around like, who? And there is also a piece of me where I was really interested in knowing it, is because it's twofold. It's like, I almost want to know, like, point to them so I know, so I can, as I look at WeDeepen at times as a reputation system to someone, because we're a third party entity validating the work of somebody else, and within the space of intimacy and love and relationship and, communities, it's really important, because you can manipulate people really easily when it comes to love. And so I'm like, point them out, tell me. And at the same time, I also notice that at times when people tell you things about other people, when I go into my experience with them, I want to also, it's this dance of, I want to be able to formulate my own opinions, and hold them as in like, hey, we're ever changing, evolving, transforming beings. So the whole topic is pretty nuanced in itself. Your situation was not a sexual assault, and it was not a man. No. And again, I'm using that word bravery to actually come into a space. I can't imagine if I was in that space and these two individuals that I've had, or three individuals that I've had experiences with, what would it be like? Like we always know that there's times where you want to know that you walk into space and your ex-boyfriend is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you want to know and be able to prepare for that moment. What, from a witnessing standpoint, what is it? What do you want people to know? What's and this is like the story. Is the story important to be shared? And I imagine that there was a curiosity to listen. I wanted to know the story.
I do want to address one piece, which is the implicit bias piece. And so this is also something that I trained for as an intimacy coordinator for television and film, which has informed my coaching practice, which has informed how I help understand my own personal relationships and how I'm checking myself continuously on my implicit bias. So implicit bias starts around like 0 to 3. Like we are downloading information in our brains, in our subconscious, that then comes out many, 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 many years later. And that piece around like when I expressed what this like assault piece, and I didn't say a gender and I didn't say a name, was because I still wanted to be in integrity with myself without going into some sort of smear campaign, you know, out of like fear for other people saying like, oh, that never works. It never works to publicly out someone. It's better to do it, you know, in a process by which nobody has the time to do. So it's not until you have a Me Too movement and you have enough people who are willing to say the name, say it out in public, and get enough people to support them in that process that the change happens. So that's one piece, is that like, implicit bias piece is like, I want to invite everyone who went to Unleash to check their implicit bias. When you hear something, what do you think? And why are you thinking that? And how is it based on your experience as opposed to the other person? Where do we go? A female identifying person can assault someone just as much as a male identifying person. And that's what happened to me. It was a female identifying person who assaulted me. And it wasn't sexual assault. It was assault of my home, which is my first root chakra. Sexual assault is your second root chakra. I mean, these are huge points of our being. Our lower chakra systems are money, power, and sex. And when that's disrupted, everything is disrupted. So for 13 months, I've been just trying to move and heal and address my experience, and also take accountability, go into tapping and go into the spaces of like, oh, I take, you know, accountability for where I've been using this pattern to other people. And I'm going to tap on that and I'm going to move that. But then it gets to the point where it's like, okay, great. Now what? Like, what about the fact that this happened? What about the fact that it's not getting addressed? What about the fact that it's easier for this person to threaten me with an eviction notice, which is completely I don't know the word I'm looking for right now, but it was just a very ludicrous threat, to not message me in 13 months and take accountability and at least say, regardless of whether I agree with what I did or what you did or how it happened, something happened that didn't need to happen. And how do we start a process to heal and recover? And that never happened until this moment. And that's a huge thing. Like, I just saw a smile on your face and it helped me feel secure. Like, it's okay to keep talking about this, because I'm holding my breath a little bit. I'm noticing I'm a little bit in a space of like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I feel like that's so often the case with people who are in these kinds of situations. It's like, you want to feel valid. I want to feel validated for my experience. And I also want to be seen as someone who is respectable. And that reputation piece is a big part of it. So I feel like the story that needs to get heard is that when leaders of communities, like any community, Yariksa, Burning Man, Heart Yard, Utopia, One Taste, any community, is what accountability process do you have when you fuck up? How do you step into your full power by allowing your vulnerability to show and where your shadow is, to be witnessed fully in that space, so that the victim can also step in their power and be witnessed fully in their space, so that we understand the paradigm of humanity, which is that we hurt each other and we hurt ourselves. So, you know, the whole blame language thing, the whole drama triangle thing, the whole like persecution, rescuer, victim thing, it's like, that serves a really great purpose in how I could potentially tell this story. But honestly, like, what I just need to know is that we're going to have a restorative justice process, and that it's going to be witnessed by a community of people that are not necessarily involved with the direct community and the direct community, so that there can be an accountability process. And how do I make that happen? How do we make that happen without it being a modern day witch hunt? Without it being something of like, okay, now that we know about this person, we're going to cancel them. And I'm not encouraging anyone to cancel this person, but what I'm encouraging us to do is to take a deeper look at who we're continuing to spend our time with, how we're continuing to feed their projects and not feed the projects of people who are actually holding integrity. And yeah, I think that that is something that for me personally, it's like, no, I don't want the person who assaulted me. I don't want her to not have a life or happiness or joy or care or support or success. I want all of those things for her. But what I also want is for her to step up to me and say, I did you wrong. And that's important to me. And when I hear that accountability piece, which is one of my apology languages, by the way, if we're going to get into that work, although recently I heard that like the person who created love languages and apology languages is like a big no-no.
Why is it that I've been hearing that so often of creators of things recently? It's rather interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a podcast for a different time. But like, I just need that. And I understand that I may never get that, because it's like you were saying, like a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner, a lover, you break up and sometimes you never get that. I'm sorry. I never got the I'm sorry from my father when he disappeared. But I did get the I'm sorry from my mother when she acknowledged how much she abused me. So sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't. But I think in this particular dynamic, there's a real opportunity here in Austin for this restorative justice process to actually happen, as opposed to it just continuously being self-personal development work. And yes, the self-personal development work is so important, because if we don't work on ourselves, how do we meet somebody else? And I completely agree with that. But also, if we don't collectively work on each other, how are we meeting each other in the grander scheme of things? Why are we even developing community? Why are we even building in this way when honestly, we can just all have our own land and our own plots of land and do our own thing? And we could potentially never talk to each other if we didn't want to, but that's not who we are.
I love that you just expanded my mind into something, because yes, self-development is an important part of the journey. And then where my work has been focused on is the relational care. We can do self-care, but what are you doing to forward and deepen your relationships? And what I hear you calling out is like, what about community? There's actually a next level of that, of co-care. Like, what is the co-care process for us as we want to live in collective harmony on this earth? Most people are like, yes, sign me up for that. And I don't know too many programs that actually call that aspect of it to become in the forefront. And it would be really interesting if you think of, neighborhoods. A lot of people live in these suburban neighborhoods, and maybe there's a swim team. Maybe there is a movie night that happens once in a while. And I think COVID also squashed a lot of that, and maybe some of that is coming back. But in those communities of how do you create programs that is caring for the collective in moving through and developing together. I don't even want to say moving through, like in their own transformation. So and also too is I want to, you had mentioned something about how, that this isn't a witch hunt, and when is it that I've spoken too much about it? Like, what is it? And I believe that what I can see in your story is that it's beyond you. It's beyond this situation. So I like to look at it as like, I'm really interested. Sure, there's a case study here, but the case study is being exhibited for there's a larger motive at place beyond just the two of you. And so I'm grateful for you to be willing to step into that and maybe say the quote unquote wrong thing. What is even the wrong thing here and there? But it's just your own expression of curiosity of being like, how can we do this better?
Yeah, I want to pull this up real quick because Malcolm Gladwell is an excellent example of someone who steps into the zone of discomfort in order to assist with social justice. So his most recent book, as far as I know, perhaps there's another one called Talking to Strangers. That book is insane. And it's literally case studies and anecdotes of moments where harm has been committed to the degree that people have committed suicide because of the harm. And it just becomes another headline story. Where are we taking accountability? Where are we taking action? How are we taking it? What are we allotting time in our day for these kinds of ruptures? I believe in normalizing clearing conversations. The amount of times where I thought somebody did something or said something that I felt was like weird or off or disrespectful or unkind, and then I approached them and then they gave me their perspective and I realized that I had made a story about it, I was like, whoa, what a gift to be able to just say, hey, can I have a clearing conversation with you? This and this and this happened. I felt this and this and this way. What do you have to say about that? Thank you for sharing your experience with me. This is my request of what I need right now to feel safer. Are you able to meet me in that request? Yes, no, maybe. How can we negotiate? And then boom, you either come to a point of being able to say, hey, we can reconnect now, or you say, actually, I'm not feeling safe right now. I need support from others to help me feel safer in this dynamic. Let's revisit this another time and let's continue this process up until the point that it can be continued. Like I said earlier, not everything is going to have the perfect quote unquote resolution. I may not even fully get this restorative justice experience. I don't know. The person who assaulted me, she has agreed to it as of Saturday, which was 4 days ago. So what does that look like now?
What does that look like? What is it? Is it a Zoom call? Is it something done in person? Is it, you mentioned a mediator? You mentioned 2 mediators. Can you speak to a little bit of maybe what you're imagining of a restorative justice process?
Yes. So I attended which, there's also controversy around this particular institution and organism and organization. And I acknowledge the victims who have not felt supported in this organization. Thank you for speaking up. And as someone who attends these retreats and someone who is very closely connected to some of the members of this organization, I am fully available to listen to anybody's experience of what worked for them and what didn't work for them. And so I say that because I am someone who attended Haydn Mystery School, and I'm someone that attends ISTA retreats. And so Haydn Mystery School is a 6-week long program, kind of similar to what you're talking about, this witness circle with this other facilitator, which I'm very curious about. And there's an exercise called Conscious War. And Conscious War is done on Mars Day. Mars Day is Tuesday. Mars is the planet of love and war. And this tool was developed to attempt to address something and nip it on the bud on Mars Day, which is a day to be direct. And so, which is Tuesday is today.
How perfect.
And basically, the people who are in that community circle, there's a circling practice that we would do every day. And in the circling practice, if there's something alive for someone, they step into the circle and they emote and they feel and they run through emotional release techniques and they get witnessed in whatever it is that's happening: joy, fear, pain, anger, lust, whatever it is. So the conscious war piece is there's someone in the container that I feel personally confronted by or affronted by. So there's an opportunity to then say, I call conscious war on X person. And X person decides, yes, I accept, or no, I'm not available for that today. Wait till next week or something else. And if they say yes, each person, let's say I'm person Y and I called person X. So person Y and person X step into the middle. They ask another person in the field to provide emotional support to them, either by sitting next to them, behind them, offering a hand on the back, whatever they want. And then they sit across from each other with some sort of deity in the middle. It was Baphomet. Some people think of Baphomet as being this like sign of the occult and of evil, and it's not. Actually, Baphomet is a deity that takes negative energy and it transmutes it, and otherwise it transforms it into positive energy. And it's taking in the negative energy, just like our trees. Our trees take in negative energy and they actually create positive vibrations and frequencies in the shamanistic realm. So instead of directing energy at the person when you have this conflict, you direct it at this symbol, at this deity. And our words have frequency, they have energy. So when we direct our words towards another person, that's like getting hit with daggers. So in a healing circle, what is it like to actually address the person, but send the energy somewhere else so that it's not hitting the person over again? And then the other person witnesses and listens. And then the other person has an opportunity to speak. And it's 3 rounds of 3 minutes each. And I thought that was such an incredible tool. It helped me. I'd used it every Tuesday, because I was practicing moving anger in my body with this amazing tool at the time. So what I'm envisioning for this particular restorative justice process is more of a combination of like what we see in mediated spaces with a larger community witnessing, something like you would witness like a town hall meeting, but instead of it being, people directing questions at 2 or 3 individuals, it's myself and this other person having an opportunity to witness one another, to listen to the full story while the whole community witnesses us in the process. And the mediation piece is there just in case like there is some sort of challenge that pops up. Someone steps in and wants to speak. The crowd gets rowdy, that kind of situation. And then I feel like the mediation piece also comes in when people from the community want to share. So it's like a group circling experience at some point, except that no one on the outskirts witnessing is going to be asking myself or this person who assaulted me direct questions. They're just going to listen. And then we're going to step back after we've shared our experience. And anybody else who has been affected by this or in the moment feels like they want to share something either about that subject or about something that's alive for them and what's moving through them, to have the opportunity to share that, to let that shamanic piece come out where we get to heal collectively from this. Because it's like you said, like when I spoke, there's something in you that was like, there's been times I didn't speak up. And that's actually happened a lot. I've been watching the Unleashed thread, is a bunch of people have been just speaking up about someone assaulted me, or I was too afraid to say something. I received a really beautiful testimonial from someone in the field that was sent to me privately that was like, I remember the countless times I just didn't say anything. So how do we learn to hold and say things and be witnessed in a way where it doesn't create cancel culture? It creates an opportunity to say, like, that person was living in their truth and that person was living in their truth. And those actions that took place are absolutely not actions that need to continue to take place. And we as a community are going to be maintaining some sort of integrity for ourselves as we witness other people being in integrity with themselves. And now the question is, when I speak, will I be in integrity? And when she speaks, will she be in integrity? And that's yet to be unknown.
And you're picturing this as an in-person experience. Yes. Now, when you're thinking of a mediator, because that's a position of power that comes into play, how do you decipher? You had said you have one mediator in mind and you have a second one who you're interested. What are the qualifications of that particular person to play that role?
So the one person who's agreed to mediation thus far is a legal mediator, and she was a lawyer for many years before stepping into a facilitation role. And so I feel like that's very important, is to literally have some sort of certification in mediation, legal mediation, and some certification in restorative justice. And another piece that was brought to me by a friend was the race piece around the second mediator, the co-mediator being someone of color. And so that's also important. Granted, the mediator that's currently in talks, that person has their own marginalizations. I'm not going to speak too much to their character, what they look like, or what their name is. But there is this undercurrent piece of race. And I don't like to play the race card, but I am a person of color, and the person who assaulted me is not. She's white. She's a landlord. She owns property. She's a community leader. A lot of people know her, and she's helped a lot of people. So people don't really know me. I'm new. I just showed up on the scene. And I have to say, it's been really challenging in my network of friends, which you've started to meet some of those friends and some of those people. And there's been this element of no one wanting to take sides. And I hear that. However, what I need from my friends in this kind of situation is for them to say their truth, and also to say, how can I support you?
Yeah, I think that's, in taking sides, because I imagine that you're probably not even looking at people to take sides necessarily. You're seeking, as you said, support, and also of a deeper understanding, and also stepping up to support both of us through a restorative process. Now, when you mentioned the race card, I have those quotes around my hand because you did those too. What is it, for you? I am a white woman. What is it for you? Like, what is the feeling behind bringing that forth into the conversation? Like, why bring that forth into the conversation? Why is that important? It's
interesting. So this turn of events of speaking out and Unleash in this moment, very charged moment. And then this thread starting, this domino effect starting, it resulted in a conversation with the potential mediator speaking to the person who assaulted me 4 days ago. And the reason that this conversation even started is because I was attending a workshop that this mediator put on Sunday, and then the person who assaulted me signed up for it. And I stayed in Austin to attend that workshop. And I also was staying in the house that the workshop was happening in. So the question came up, what do we do? And I said, well, I'm just not comfortable with this person being there in addition to 2 other individuals until there's a restorative justice process that's happened. And my request was honored. And inclusively, I didn't even have to make the request because the facilitator automatically was like, yeah, you just went through that on Unleash, so we don't need to do that again. And what the mediator did was had a conversation with this person who assaulted me and said, what are your thoughts around having a restorative justice process with Meleza? And this person's response was, well, now that we're not, quote unquote, attacking or threatening each other, then I feel good about doing a restorative justice process. And also after attending Unleash and attending the de-armoring workshop, she felt able to even be able to have this conversation, which again is wonderful. But like, it is a little bit of that, like, okay, space. And then she told the mediator, AKA the facilitator, that she understands that there's power dynamics, and she understands that she's white, and she understands that she's the landlord. And the mediator, you know, said that she brought that up on her own. Granted, I had a conversation with someone, you know, 3 weeks ago, 1 week before Unleash. And I mentioned in the text message thread, I said, I will not continue to allow another person in power to undermine and marginalize communities. I am a person of color. I am a sacred sexuality practitioner. It was known that I was doing tantric body work in that space, and that person chose to physically and emotionally assault me in my home. Knowing that I'm a sex worker in the state of Texas, where abortion was just seen as illegal. No, you don't do that. You don't do that. And for me, think it's the same thing, I guess, of people who just get assaulted because they're Black, I suppose, you know, they just get assaulted because they're not what someone else sees as being appropriate or being allowed or being deemed valued. Sex workers are not seen as appropriate or allowed or deemed as valued. So for me personally, I'm very privileged because I'm a light-skinned brown person. I'm mixed race with a white family on one side and an Afro-Latino, indigenous, Caribbean side as well. So I haven't experienced a lot of racial prejudice, discrimination, or racism. I've been fortunate because of that. But I do see this piece that this person has brought up, which is that in the South, if you're a white woman and you're saying that a person of color did something to you, who are they going to believe?
Yeah, I also look at it too is I'm really interested in diversification amongst the quote unquote conscious communities. And it's, you know, at the, not this past Unleash, the Unleash before, a dear friend, Natalia was there, a girlfriend from New York City, and she's Black. And there's another woman in the space who's Black. I think there's maybe 3 Black women at that last Unleash, and maybe a couple Black men in the space. But out of 200 people, you know, 5, let's say. And so I'm in constant conversation with them of like, how do we how do we bring more diversification into these experiences? And so I can see from, that other perspective of looking at, like, we want to create these spaces that are where everybody is valued. And while these scenarios and situations can be nuanced, but there's a sensitivity inside of it of inclusion. And when somebody is assaulted, that almost is like a feeling of get out. You don't belong. And whether that has anything to do with inside of their head of your race at all, there's an overarching, this is where the overarching something bigger is at play than just the two people involved. It's like having a sensitivity and heightened awareness of, we want to bring more people into these spaces and be more welcoming into it. And how can we not let our triggers, because whatever happened inside of her in that moment, there was a trigger, that response to it. And to have those triggers come from a more conscious place that is more aware of the deeper mission of connectivity that is being required and called forth. And there's a greater job to be done for me, of somebody, I guess, from an outside perspective. I'm only realizing this in the moment, and it just hits me. It's like, don't stop, bring more, we need to diversify more. So don't push. And if we have 5 in the space, we want more. So don't push any of them away. Actually being more heightened awareness around how we can be even more greatly gracious with the people of all walks of life that come into our spaces, especially when you are leaders and landowners. That's where I think the invitation can come to, hey, step up. There is more, and it doesn't, I know in the mind can limit it in a particular moment of situation, but when the picture becomes bigger, I think we can all agree that that's the driver. It's not about, quote unquote, the race card. It's about how can we be more inclusive and more inviting and more open and welcoming to create greater diversity within our spaces.
Yeah, so beautifully said. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, it's interesting. There's also this theme, that I discovered much more here in Texas, which is the whitewashing of the Mexican people in Texas. And this is something that's happened in Latin Americans throughout the United States of America, and also all people of color who had to change their last names to be seen as more respectable, to get more job opportunities. And a lot of the Mexican Americans that I know, they, consider themselves white passing. And what does that mean to be white passing as a BIPOC person? And who is that helping? And where is the account? And so then I hear there's an accountability piece there, but I'm not sure I'm seeing certain people understand what that then implies for them and for their tribe that is of color. So, yeah, I feel like that's a huge subject matter, and in how we speak about race relations, especially in Texas, is that a lot of BIPOC people here, or a lot of people I've met who are Mexican American, or whose grandparents are of some form of ethnicity that's not quote unquote white, that they will do their darndest to be white. And it's sad. So yeah, how are we creating safer spaces for even BIPOC people to be like, I have been white passing my whole life, and from this moment forward, I'm going to choose to use my privilege as power. I'm not just going to keep using it. And the work I've done with Tara Anderson, who's an incredible teacher. They created, my apologies, the queer competency certification, which I took, which was how do I create a trans inclusive, queer inclusive business model? And one of the questions she asked us was, who are you protecting? Who are you protecting when you see someone do a violent crime against someone else who's in a marginalized or oppressed community? And why? And that's a huge question that I ask myself when I have bias towards someone else. Who am I protecting? Am I protecting myself? And why am I protecting myself? Why do I need to protect myself? Am I all of a sudden not safe?
Yeah. Oh, we made it to an hour and 4 minutes. And I know we went really deep into what can somewhat be looked at as a dense conversation, but also an important conversation. And I would be curious to have you back in a month or so, or whenever you are feeling like there's the next part of the story to be told, to follow up with this episode. So anybody who's listening can have that. It's like, what happened? Sure. What happened with that, and how can they learn for their own individual communities as well, is really important. Before we do wrap though, I would love to hear a little bit more, because I know we didn't get into your work. If you could share a little bit about what you're up to in the world and what you are creating personally. And what I do love about this conversation, I think we all got to get a glimpse of you. So to end with who you are and what you're creating in the world would feel really good.
Thank you. So I work many parallel paths. I'm an intimacy coordinator for television and film. I have a sacred sexuality practice, private practice, and I'm an intimacy coach. And so I have a coaching program called Pleasure Uncensored. And again, it's that theme of helping folks experience their pleasure uncensored and be able to freely express in safer spaces, and also exploring their freedom of choice in that process. So I love working in the sexual revolution. I love honoring people in their process from all across the board. I love being in service to others in this way. It informs my joy and my happiness to be in service to the divine, and to walk this path of being a sexual revolutionary and a pleasure activist. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram at eatmycake.love. And I do have a drop down menu if anyone's interested in helping me with marketing. Holler. I have my website, Meleza, Melezas Morris, MORRIS.com. And you can find more information there on my intimacy coordination. And if anyone wants a resume for any productions they have going on, I can send that to you. And in addition to that, I've come to this huge piece around my work and this subject matter of grief. Because at the end of the day, what I realized throughout all of this experience is that I lost my friends. And I lost the people that I was building love and connection and community with. And that grief process has been wild. And I'm just realizing how much in intimacy and in these spaces of sexuality, there's a deep, deep level of grief around what relationships didn't work out, around what could have been and never was. And I'm stepping more powerfully into wanting to learn how to hold folks in their grief, specifically around the realms of sensuality and sexuality and intimacy, and then weaving that into rupture, repair, and reconnection workshops and opportunities. Because I lived my life fighting almost all of it. And I just kind of realized, like, I don't know if I want to keep doing that anymore. I think I want to love more, and I want to help people love more. and we can rise in love together. We can elevate together. We have the capacity for it. So yeah, I think I'll leave y'all with that.
Oh, so much good stuff there. I could have a whole other podcast with you around grief, and I'm curious of what that means of going into this work and feeling as though you've lost loved ones through it. And I can see too in your invitation to create these restorative justice processes is part of that letting go of all of the fighting, but also seeing the value in an accountability and in taking ownership, and also important in the healing process for us all. When you do have, when you mention the call out for if you're a marketer during the, go to her Instagram and see the drop down of whatever is in the link tree, I imagine something of that in there. I'm curious to go take a look and see how WeDeepen can support you in what you're creating, because I think we have some of the marketing there in place. Thank you, Meleza, for your vulnerability and your courage, and your authenticity and your willingness to have these conversations and to inject energy into that, because sometimes it's easier to just go to sleep. Anger tends to be really easy. It's easy to sit in the anger, while love, to me, at times can also be easy. It also is the miracle inside of all of this, to be able to show love to somebody that hurt you. And I can even see in your speaking of this situation that there is such grace and care and love around this other human being. And that's what you're calling forth, is like, I think you can do better. Mm-hmm. And we can all do better. And that's what you stand for. And I am so appreciative of that. And I think anybody who's listening can learn from that experience. I'm taking that for myself as well, as I reflect on experiences that I have run from, and I haven't stepped up in ways that I could have.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. You're so dope. And thank you to everyone for listening. And just lots of love and gratitude.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Deepen with Christina. Again, if you enjoy this show, please do like, subscribe, follow, rate. Also, I'm available if you want to reach out for any feedback. You can find me at Christina Weber on Instagram with 1B, or go ahead and shoot me over an email, c@wedeepen.com. Definitely go check out that calendar. What I love talking to you in this way, what I appreciate even more, is being with you in person. So let's get together, check out that calendar, and let's do fun, dope stuff together. Bye for now. Love you.